Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Workflow webinar series. This week, we are honored to have some crew members from Luke Bryan's tour. They're going to take us through a typical day when they roll up to a football stadium for a big show. Before we get started, I want to take care of a few housekeeping things. So we're all on our various internet connections around the world, and if we have any troubles, we'll try to resolve those and get back as soon as possible. Also, if you have questions during the webinar here, please go ahead and submit them in the questions panel, and we'll get to them as quickly as we can and as many as we can. So with that, I want to introduce our guests. We have Malone, who is Luke Bryan's front of house engineer. We've got Seth Kendall, who is Luke Bryan's monitor engineer, and Dustin Ponscheck, who is the RF coordinator on the tour. And yeah, I just wanted to kind of start by taking us through the typical day. The buses and trucks roll up to the football stadium. And Dustin, I think you're probably in there first getting your RF gear set up. Take us through what you do to get started.
Yeah, sure. My first step, once it's all wired up, is just to start scanning. And once Workbench gives me a scan, I analyze it a bit, and then I'll assign and deploy frequencies, and then go from there. Once I'm happy with all that, I'll critique it a bit, and then the most important thing I do after that is really just walk around, listen to the ear mixes and the vocals, and yeah.
Okay. And before you've arrived at the stadium, have you usually done any pre-work ahead of time? Have you gotten any preliminary scans, or are you just going on the fly when you roll up
really.
there?
I'm on the fly. Workbench makes everything really fast for me, so I'm able to do that. The only thing I might try to find out in advance is if the house is using anything that might get in my way, so I know ahead of time what to avoid.
Okay.
Other than that, no, it's roll in, set it up, scan it, assign and deploy, and start walking and listening.
Well, let's go through some of the gear that you're setting up and assigning frequencies. So let's talk about Axient Digital first. Talk about what you're using there and for what applications, if you could.
All the ears are PSM 1000s. I've got a total of 9 dual PSM 1000s, 18 mixes, using backline is all 81 transmits, 40 receives, with a little bit of UR, some of the older UR 4D stuff that still works great. I use about 6 channels of that for the backline. And then Luke's vocals are all 4D with ADX sticks and some 81s for guest vocals.
Cool. Had a quick question come in. What are you scanning for typically? You've got all your gear, but you also have opening acts as well. And can you talk a little bit about what you're looking for in a scan and what you're scanning?
Yeah, the scan I do is really just for Luke, for our band. Occasionally I get involved with some opening acts, but if they need help, but not very often. And with any scan, you're just looking to see what's going on around you and where you can fit in. Digital TV being the biggest obstacle.
Okay.
Just try to find the space, just to fit in. Some cities are a little more difficult, but for the most part, there's plenty of space still left out there, and we're able to do it.
And what do you use for your scanner?
I scan with Workbench, but I also have a TTI on hand, just to kind of dial in and maybe get a closer look. But I use the frequency plot in Workbench for a live scan that I keep up all day. So I'm always looking. But the initial scan that I use to calculate frequencies is done all in Workbench.
Okay. And you mentioned a minute ago about, certain cities. Can you talk about some of the cities you've rolled up to and you've kind of looked at the scan and went, oh my goodness, it's going to be one of those days?
I mean, there's two cities that stick out really in my mind, in Dallas and probably Vegas, I think, are probably two of the most challenging. New York's a bit of a challenge, but typically in New York, you're indoors, being inside all that concrete and metal and the isolation it provides is huge. Outdoors, a lot more challenging, which that's most of what we do is outdoor stuff. But yeah, Dallas and Vegas specifically, especially when you're outdoors.
Cool.
Everywhere else, I mean, it's, like I said, we always find space.
That's cool. Well, hey, I jumped into this so quickly that I actually skipped over a question, and that was one for all of you, and that is basically give us a little bit of your background, how you got started in audio, and some of the artists you've all worked with. Frank, let's start with you.
Is that me, Ron?
Oh, okay. My background. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Nerdery. I was a musician and learned how to operate the gear, basically. I went to trade school, picked up audio as like my main thing. That was really what I wanted to do, and just worked my way into working for bigger and bigger companies. And, I wound up being here. It's a long way, but it's a lot of work. It's really start at the bottom and worked my way to this. It's the simplest thing I could tell you.
Yeah. Who are some of the other artists you've worked with before Luke?
Before Luke was Alice in Chains. Before that was Godsmack, Papa Roach. I have filled in on a lot of events for a lot of other guys. So it's not fair for me to say like all these people, you know what I mean? I'm not padding the resume. I just don't get fired a lot, so I don't have a whole lot of people to list, really.
That's great. What about you, Seth?
Well, my favorite way to explain it is that when I was about 6 years old, my mother gave me her old boom box and a pair of headphones, and she wanted me to be able to listen to music without driving her crazy. And being that this was in the 70s, the boom box had an input for a microphone and an output for a headphone jack. And I pretty quickly learned that I could plug in my headphones into the microphone input, and the transducer works in both directions. And immediately after that, I discovered feedback. And ever since then, for the most part, I've been fascinated by audio. Similar to Frank, I was a musician. I played drums. When I was really small, I played violin. Playing in bands and touring around with your friends and their bands and stuff and playing shows, I kind of fell into helping out on the audio side of things. And before you knew it, I discovered that you could get paid for doing such a thing. And I never really left. I went to college in South Africa and did audio and played in bands all the way through that. When I returned to the United States at the end of the 90s, I got right back into it and was hired by Shoko. And here we are.
Cool. And some artists you worked with before Luke?
Before Luke, Usher, Kanye West, Lionel Richie, Smashing Pumpkins, Lucinda Williams. There's quite a few of them. It goes back several years. Carrie Underwood. It starts getting a little blurry, but I'm about 20 years in at this point.
Gotcha. All right, and finally, Dustin, how did you find yourself into the position of handling RF coordination for Luke's tour?
2016, I got a call to do the gig. Oh, by the way, you're doing RF. I had never been responsible for that gig before, and I really just learned on the job. I screwed a lot of things up, but hey, that's the best way to learn. Get the gig, make it work. So Luke's the only gig that I've ever coordinated any RF for. I've certainly messed with it in past gigs and been a part of it, but never where it was my job.
Mm-hmm. What were some of your previous positions before Luke?
I've always been in monitors as a systems guy, stage, PA. I've kind of done a little bit of everything. Prior to this, I spent several years with Bon Jovi. Shinedown was another recent one before Luke. Just to name a couple.
Cool. Well, thanks for that, guys. So jumping back into the day, so Dustin, you've got everything set up and frequencies assigned and everything. Seth, what's your next step as far as getting your world set up?
Well, the main thing for me is making sure that I've got coffee close at hand, and a lot of it. Dustin really takes care of everything. When I roll in, on some days, if he's in a good mood, he will have left me a few things to plug in. On other days, he will have taken care of everything, and there's not much for me to do besides tell him what a great job he did. Not every tour is like that, but
Right.
Having Dustin makes my life very easy. He's very dedicated to the gig, and everything gets done usually before I even leave the bus, if I'm going to be honest about it. And again, not every tour is like that, but I'm very lucky on this one that that's the way we roll. So the first thing that I really do in the day that's besides coffee and food oriented is to just kind of walk in, get a feel for the stage, look at anything that might be different in terms of maybe there's a different audience mic configuration, maybe there is a band member with an issue. That often happens. Somebody will come and talk to me about the show the previous night. Maybe they want to change something. Maybe they have a question about something that happened. But for the most part, my real work begins when we start doing bond check.
Okay, cool. And take us through that process for you guys on a normal day a little bit.
Well, once Dustin is ready with the RF for everybody, and once Frank and I have gone and positioned microphones and just double checked everything, we usually typically we'll start with the drums, but we're pretty loose. We're not very rigid. If somebody else is ready first, we'll start with the first person that's ready and do a very thorough check of every single input before we let a band member take the stage.
Okay, cool. Dustin, maybe you can talk a little bit about the typical stage setup, and are there any obstacles for RF interference in his particular setup?
I'm sorry, did you say are there any obstacles?
Yeah, well, obstacles for RF interference. You guys have a lot of LED walls and.
Oh, right. There's a lot of LED walls. Yes. I haven't had any problems with that. I think my biggest obstacle really would be in the stadiums where our guy spends 75% of his show way out there. So I have to, I usually add a couple things, mostly for his vocal, some additional receive antennas to overcome that. But I've been pretty successful in just about any venue we go into. We play them all. I mean, sheds, arenas, stadiums.
Yeah, it's no joke.
Yeah.
Arms.
Well,
I mean, honestly, the system we have is simple. There's really not it's pretty straightforward, and it all works.
Well, speaking of Luke being all the way out there, he's usually all the way out there by Frank. So Frank, let's talk about your day and how that gets going.
So yeah, my typical day on a tour, it can change a little bit in the morning depending on whether I have my typical touring PA. I carry a Clairco 12 PA. Love it to death. I know exactly what it's going to do. My day changes a little bit going into festivals. This is why we are real loose about how we approach the line check and order operations and stuff. But I walk into a PA that's a typical stadium day where we're doing our PA. We've done the math for the PA long before. We know what the coverage is. Fish, Jim Miller, has already pretty much deployed the PA by the numbers. We're going to go in, move microphones, make sure everything is where we want it. And then we go through it, very thorough, but quick. We don't sit around all day long. We don't re-EQ things. We don't play around. We have an objective. So we get there pretty quick. The line check, without a rehearsal, which is the other half we missed, we almost never see the band. if that sounds insane to a lot of people who are out here, we almost never sound check. Luke is, he's a ghost. He very rarely shows up. It might be at a television show. So it really is all on us to make the decisions about the audio. 80, 90% of the time, we don't see an artist or a band member on a show day. And that counts for stadiums, arenas, theaters. It doesn't matter where we are. Their day doesn't change, and ours kind of just massages around that. It works really well. They know the songs, we know the equipment, and we've got it down by, I hope we do. I don't know who's out there thinking these people are nuts. But we have a pretty good working system, and the audio crew is spectacular. It's been really fun. I'm fortunate, and I wouldn't rather work anywhere else. Luke, Claire, the rest of them, it's been pretty fantastic.
Well, go for it, Seth.
Something I'd just like to point out is that with our daily routine, being informal lets us be quick. Sometimes the front of house engineer will absolutely have to call every input, and it's driven by front of house. We don't do it that way. I'm on the deck and I can see what's happening. I can see who's ready. So typically I'll call the inputs because I can see who's ready, and we go that way, and it happens pretty fast. We don't like to spend a whole lot of time standing around waiting if we can avoid it. And then the second thing I was going to say is that the no sound check thing, in my experience, is becoming more and more common, especially with the lead singer. It's getting to a point where they are expecting us to have everything perfect for them without them showing up. And we're pulling it off enough that it's being kind of the way it's done now. The star doesn't have to go out there. There's nobody to see him. He can sleep late, whatever he needs to do. And we're ready for him when he hits the stage at showtime.
Well, cool. And are you guys usually running a virtual sound check as well before the band gets up there?
Not really through the PA anymore.
Okay.
It's great to have, but once I'm in there and once we know how to deal with the PA system itself, I don't like to wake, the campers. At festivals, you're waking people up out in the parking lot. If you're in an arena, you're going to drive everybody nuts all day long, especially the poor chair people. By the time everybody's gone, they're laying out chairs, and you've got, a rock god mix in the PA, and they're just, hating you. It just seems unnecessarily cruel to do that to people all the time. But yeah, it's useful in the headphones or in near fields to keep things under control. We talked about this a little bit, drift. You start to maybe get used to something not being right, and there's always a reference that's smaller than the PA system to listen to.
Yeah.
Works for me.
Excellent. Well, I think I'm going to bring Mr. Jason Waffle on board to ask you guys a few questions as well. Jason, are you ready to jump on here?
What's up, everybody? Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it. Hey, Dustin, Seth, Frank, what's going on? Fantastic conversation so far. I think I was going to dive into Dustin a little bit deeper on some of the RF stuff as we move kind of position to position. I know we're going to get into some more monitors in front of house a little bit later. I'm going to bring Jen on board. But Dustin, you mentioned that you have a workflow where obviously Luke's sometimes out in the arena, and you talked about multiple zones. How are you setting up that zone antenna system? What are you using for distribution in that element?
870 paddles. I have I use 4 of them in the stadiums for Luke's vocal. 2 are on the main deck with me and monitors.
Yep.
Pretty standard setup there, shooting towards the stage.
Yeah.
The other 2 are deployed downstage, more downstage left, closer to me. I like to keep my runs at 50 foot or less if I can, and I'm able to do that. And they're just shooting out towards the screamer decks where he's at most of the night. So
awesome. Same for ears. You have a single transmit point. Does that change with a larger venue? Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm using Claire fractal antennas, and I haven't had any issues really in the stadiums. I've been able to walk to the hardest spot for me to really nail, and I'm able to still do it, would be the far stage left screamer deck. I know you guys haven't probably seen the stadium set up, but it's out there. It's a really long runway. As long as I can walk out there and I can hear everything, and I spend a lot of time, way more in the stadiums walking than anywhere else.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of success. So.
No, that's a great point. I mean, obviously we talked about your first thing when you get in there is a scan. You want to talk about kind of what happens next in terms of walk testing and changing frequencies and moving antennas. Is that kind of that workflow? And are you walking all these packs?
Yeah, I mean, once I have the frequencies, I'll go ahead and assign everything and deploy it to all the hardware. And then I'll just slowly start turning things on and continuing to look at the scans, the live scan, seeing where they're coming up at, the spacing, paying attention to those kinds of things. And then if I'm satisfied there, that's when I start walking. And I like to walk the ears with nothing. I just want to hear just the pack.
Right. So no pink noise or just
no, just nothing, you know. Okay. And then once I'm satisfied with all that, then I like to put on Luke's pack, grab his vocal, and I'll start walking with that. And I'll just make sure Seth has it unmuted, which he usually does, and I can go out there and just make sure nothing's breaking up and everything's tight.
Yeah, awesome. We've kind of talked about the principal and kind of the front line. What are you guys using for your back line and in terms of guitars and things like that for RF?
So it's all AD. It's 16 channels of AD 4D, and then I have 6 channels of UR 4D. I'll just quickly on the UR 4Ds. Those are 2 channels are for Luke's acoustics, main and backup, or 1 and 2, and then I have 2 channels of that for guest guitars. And then the final 2 channels of the UR are for Michael Carter's electrics. All other instruments are on the AD4D using the AD1 packs. About 20 of those.
Wow. So how many channels total would you say you're operating on any given night in terms of RF?
I think I'm right around, well, it's not that they're all being used at the same time, but I coordinate for approximately 48 channels, I think is what it is.
Wow.
And I'd say at any given moment, you know, we're probably, you know, in the low 20s, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Depending on what song and what everyone's playing and who's in, who's out, you know.
Yeah, question from the field here just came in on this this topic here. What are some of the biggest hindrances to the RF transmission dropouts? Like, what are your biggest proponents of that? And then I guess what are some of your solutions to dropouts and I guess noise in the IEM even?
Oh, good question. Can I phone a friend?
You got one right here. Fire away.
Yeah, you know. Doesn't happen very often, but it does. You know, if I have to change the frequency, I don't have a problem doing that. I can do that on the fly. If it's giving me some real problems until I find something that works. You know, another solution that's not one I really like to go to. I could boost up the milliwatt. The transmission itself. I typically stay at 50.
Yep.
I don't really like going to 100 if I don't have to. And I don't do it often. That's one solution, so that sometimes can work, but you got to remember you bring up a lot of other stuff too with that. I mean, what else?
What's up, Seth?
If I can jump in, I think generally from my point of view, our biggest obstacle is really just a crowded spectrum. I think that is our biggest obstacle, without doubt. The gear always works. The frequency coordination is always on point. The only thing that's a hiccup is if we're in a really busy area. That's our biggest obstacle, is traffic.
And the other half of it is the festival days. Excuse me. We roll in, it might already be going.
Right.
You know, it's like that in some instances. So his scan is happening while all this is going on. They may not be as many channels as us, but it sure is ubiquitous. So there's going to be a lot of it somewhere, and other manufacturers, you know, they're over the same thing as well. So yeah, it
Absolutely.
can be it can be problematic.
Yeah.
It's one of those things you're like, well, we're going to have to, again, wait till later in the day when this kind of calms down and not all this is on. And again, he's been bomb-proof for us. You know, we don't have very many meltdowns. The gear's been pretty solid. I don't know that I could say anything else.
Something else, I'd like to follow up on a question from the field. And correct me if I'm wrong, Dustin, but when you're walking to belt packs, do we generally leave a mic channel so that you hear, or is it totally muted, everything's silent? Because in my experience on the hard times when I would have to do my own RF, I certainly would find that that leaving a mic channel open would help you not go down the rabbit hole of little pops and little noises that you might otherwise hear. And this, my friend Ryan Cecil actually gave me a nudge to start doing that, because he saw me running in circles, chasing little noises that would disappear if you just unmute one vocal mic. And so, Dustin, I don't remember. I think we usually have at least a vocal mic open when you're doing that. Is that correct?
Yeah, it sounds about right. Because then when we start line check, there's always, oh my God, what's that noise? And there it is. It's like sorry, it's the talk box mic. That's the one that usually is the victim.
But leaving a microphone channel, leaving a mic hot in the ears is really a good thing for people to know about, because it's so easy to go down the rabbit hole with RF. I mean, you start hearing things, and if you try to chase every one of them down, it's going to really screw up your day.
A lot of that has to do with that, you know, the analog transmission modulation portion of that, and like what happens when you add audio to that RF beam, and whether it's modulating or not in terms of transmission width and bandwidth it's taking up. So that's a really good point. Even just like a quiet room, open mic can help you get rid of some of those sounds you think you might be hearing, or sounds that aren't actually an issue when something's modulating that signal. So that's an awesome point. Circling back real quick here, Dustin, there was a question from the field here. You'd mentioned that you like to leave your transmission at 50 milliwatts. We're talking about your IEMs at that point. That's correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And so even in these massive stadiums, you're not pushing to 100, obviously, unless you see there's a specific need for that.
No, I'm not. 50 seems to be a good setting, and that's all of them. I don't put some of them at 10, some of them at 50. They're all at 50, and that's just kind of where I sit.
Yeah. While we're on that, what power are you on your transmitters for mics? I guess it'll vary between UR and AD, but where you're living there. Yeah.
Yeah, they're on. So I'm trying to remember the settings. I think you got a 4, 10, and a 30. Is that
on
right?
AD, it's 2, 10, and 35 or 20, depending on which transmitter you're on. They're standard at 10 on most of them.
Yeah. So for stadiums, I would definitely have Luke on 35 at the highest setting, just because of where he's at all night.
Yeah.
But 10 would be usually where I'd want to be, especially in a shed where he's not so far.
Right.
I would definitely notch that down. Yeah.
Frank, you brought up a good point a minute ago about festivals, and there's kind of a two-part question here. Like, what is the game plan when you walk in? Is in terms of, are you advancing for an RF coordinator? Do people reach out to you for that in terms of festivals? And then the second part of this is when you're on just a standard tour. Dustin, how are you handling like the opening acts or the support acts from an RF perspective? Are you involved in their RF plan? Are you trading frequencies with them? How do you manage that, both from a festival and a support touring act perspective?
Yeah, I don't really have a lot to do with any of the opening acts unless they ask me for my help, or that'd be the only scenario. We just all work together. Engineers in the past visiting, they've come in and they handle their RF, and I turn all my stuff off for them. We just play nice and we help each other ultimately, and that's what makes it work. So
awesome.
And most everyone is very accommodating. I don't run into too many some people can be difficult.
There's a few.
It's challenging enough without all of us getting in each other's way, so it's just best to, again, I keep all my stuff muted for those guys. And let them do their thing, and then vice versa.
Awesome. Very well said. Yeah. Help me help you in the world of RF, everybody.
Teamwork makes the dream work, right?
That's right. 100%. Cool. And I guess lastly, Dustin, from an RF perspective, what would you say is your favorite feature of Axient Digital, and why? And what makes your job easier because of that?
The word agility comes to mind. It just
oh, nice. Yeah. Hey. You're coming, Frank. I promise.
I don't care what he says.
It's AES for the win.
Better answer to this. Yes, that's a good answer, Frank. AES has definitely made a huge difference in our lives. I know Seth and Frank will have something to say about that.
I like agility. That can cover the audio outputs. That can cover the spectrum. That can cover HD mode. That can cover all kinds of stuff. I'm gonna pull your agility word out of there as the winner. Couple questions from the field on the RF topic before we transition over. Do you find that you need to change the compatibility level in Workbench to get all of your frequencies in terms of like third order intermods, fifth order intermods, things like that? Are you diving that deep into the Workbench frequency coordination realm?
I really haven't found it too necessary to do any of that. I may change the standard robust feature if I'm having problems, just to get a few more. But yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, but I don't have to do a lot of that.
That's awesome. Back to the agility. And then I guess
it's great. It works.
Wicked. One more question here. Where would you rank the importance of your antenna placement in terms of line of sight to achieve the quality you're looking for?
Oh, it's a huge part of it. That's the antennas are the whole thing. It's where they're placed, and yeah, it's
height.
Huge.
Yeah, is that a nod to height there, Seth? Yeah, height is your friend.
Get them high,
Absolutely. Yeah, usually when you're on a stage, if you look up, that's probably the most unobstructed position from anywhere else, right?
Yeah, the stands that Claire provides me with are as high as I can,
Awesome.
Until they make me something bigger, I'll want that. But.
Yeah, they're up about 25 feet, right?
Yeah, wow. Approximately. If I could put them on chain motors and a truss, I would, if it didn't take so much time.
Right.
We use large Manfrotto, just huge. These are not normal mic stands. These are the big Manfrottos.
Sounds like a lighting stand almost.
I think they're film related originally. But,
it's like speaker stand style. It's kind of what it's a tripod, and it just booms up really high.
We go as high as we can.
Yeah. So we got a question a little bit earlier here, and we're going to kind of pivot this around to workflow in terms of monitors in front of house. And it came in for Seth specifically. It's a workflow question in terms of what do you do first, and is it always first? And I know you talked about this a little bit earlier, but two-part question: do you start with wedges or do you start with IEMs? And do you start with a specific band member or the principal when you start mixing, or is it kind of you flow through the day in the venue?
Obviously, it depends on the band. For Luke, I've only got 2 wedges and a couple subs on the stage, and that's it. So it's Luke's band is very much 95% in-ears, maybe even more. Other bands are different. Obviously, every band member might be a little bit different. But for the most part, I usually see the lead singer. The lead singer's mix, my bread and butter. That's usually the one thing that nobody asks for anything about. There's no requests there. It's either right or it's not. And we very often, in my experience, these guys don't come in for sound check either. So my main priority, I'm always thinking about my lead singer's mix. Luke's mix is the first thing in my mind. It's the last thing in my mind. That is the main thing in my mind is whatever else is going on. I'm always thinking about how that affects him. The other band members, usually when we do have the luxury of a sound check, we still won't have our lead singer, but that's my opportunity to put out any fires that might be happening with the band. Because during the show, I'm very much concentrating on Luke. But for the most part, my main goal is consistency. If everybody's happy last night, then I want to do the same thing tonight. I don't want to change anything at all unless there's a problem or something that needs to be addressed. I shoot for a consistent show every night, regardless of where we are or what obstacles we face. It should sound pretty much the same, regardless.
If it's not broke, don't fix it.
Yep. Yeah, I try really hard not to fix things.
Keep it simple. Awesome. I'm gonna pull in Ms. Jen Ling Shibout here to talk with Frank a little bit more on mixing in front of house. Thanks, Jen. Thanks, guys.
Right. So, quick question, and this is actually both for Frank and Seth. The question is, what capsule is Luke on, and how does that work in both of your worlds?
Go ahead, take it, Seth.
58. SM58, the good old standby industry standard 58 is perfect for our singer, for Luke.
Yeah. So my answer to the question is it's never my answer. It's our answer. We have a pretty good working relationship from one end to the other. Everything we pick, everything that's on the stage related to audio that we have anything to say about has to be reliable. We've been talking about this in the RF sentence with Dustin about antenna placement because he's got a spot out in the stadium. Well, that spot is possibly about 185. I've been thinking about this, so this is going on. It's about 185 feet away from monitor world. So you downstage out to the end of the thrust and then out over there. Like the very first thought is it has to be reliable. Right, in every sense of the word. The mic has to stay working. If he drops it, fumbles it, it has to work radio-wise. That's the first. That's why we use the mic we use, because it's been through everything and it still works. It's the most reliable thing we've ever used.
We have to be ready for rainstorms, for anything at all. And that microphone, our lead singer, he trusts us to let him be heard. If he's out 200 feet out in the middle of a stadium and we start having dropouts and he can't trust us, that's going to interfere with the entire show. So we need, especially for the lead singer, and I'm sure this is true for everybody, you need the most reliable, bomb-proof tool that we can give to our star to make him know that his stuff's going to work when he's out there on his own.
Perfect. Question, which you mentioned, Luke likes to spend a fair amount of time in front of the PA. So, Frank, let's talk about about the challenges of that in your life.
It's not. It's just a new normal. If that hasn't been, done to death. A lot of set designers, you see them pop, and some of the avant-garde shows have the performer in the audience, not in the round, in the audience. The PA is behind them as opposed to around them, if that makes any sense. He likes being in front of it. It's hilarious because we have a spot and it's dead on. He's, when the whole thing is blowing on his back, off center when he's in front of one, he loves the way his voice sounds. And he likes hanging out there. So the challenge is to make the PA bleed into that microphone in such a way that it doesn't bother him. There isn't going to be a ticky kick drum. There isn't going to be an out of balance, pointy anything. His records don't sound pointy. His ear mix surely doesn't sound pointy. It needs to remain warm. So there's a kind of a whole thing that happens there. It still has to sound good, even in front of the PA. But that's not where we start with it. We start with it on stage, typically. He sings the way he sings, make it sound as good as you can. And then when he moves out in front of it, if you haven't done anything really destructive, with plugins or EQs or weird things like that, you can generally be okay. The 58 handles it just fine.
Beth, any specific challenges with being in front of the PA to keep the bleed out of the ear mix?
It's a constant challenge. One of the things that I've done pretty successfully for a long time is to use dynamic EQ. I use dynamic EQ the same way that you would use a Neve Portico. It's possible to use a dynamic equalizer, and I do this on the console, but you can use a dynamic equalizer to basically turn the microphone off when your star's not singing. It's not as abrupt as a gate, but it's a very soft, very smooth way of basically turning off or turning way down the microphone when he's not singing. So that's a technique thing, and if you don't have dynamic EQ, there's an outboard piece of gear called a Portico, which accomplishes the same thing. I just like doing it on board because I can do it to any channel on the input list, and it's a really effective way of managing the noise in your ear mix. To me, a noisy ear mix is the worst because your singer will blow out his ears within minutes of being out there on the stage, and nothing is going to sound good for the rest of the night. He's not going to hear himself the way he wants to, and he's not going to perform right. So avoiding noise and ear fatigue is a huge thing for me. Being in front of the PA is very challenging. As Frank said, it's normal now. So, for the past, 8 years, I've been mixing people in front of gigantic PAs. So it kind of got used to it, and you develop techniques like the dynamic EQ one to overcome that wash, that ear fatiguing problem.
Yeah, I could cause more problems for myself as a PA operator with that mic out there than he's going to cause me. It's just, the job is to make it sound good, not excruciatingly loud. So that kind of plays into it as well. What's your game plan? What are you doing? This is not a show that lends itself to Metallica or any kind of volume level of that sort. It's just not that.
So a question came in just for further clarification on why dynamic EQ versus a gate for Luke. I think that's for you, Seth, or well, either of you. Yeah.
A gate usually is very noticeable. A gate will kind of open and close, and you can tell right away when it opens. You hear the, and then when it closes, everything goes quiet, and that becomes very distracting for anybody, let alone an artist who's concentrating on performing. And so using dynamic EQ or the Portico outboard gear allows you to have a much smoother, it's almost imperceptible. The way I do it with dynamic EQ, you can adjust threshold, attack, release, and all these parameters, which let you dial it in until it's almost spooky how well it works. And the simple answer is that a gate is way more noticeable and it's distracting. Dynamic EQ is a lot smoother. It takes some fiddling. You really got to tweak it and understand how you're using the tool. But when you have it right, it's almost imperceptible.
Frank, did you have something to add? It looked like you started to jump in.
Yeah, what if it makes, to simplify the dynamic EQ, is if you were looking at frequency response from left to right from 30 to 20 to 20K, you can find the noise, the noise, where that air is that's bothering you, that's going to, you select a frequency that encompasses that. When he starts to sing, everything is wide open. As the threshold goes, as he stops, that entire frequency band dips below zero. It is depressed. That's the de-essing part of it. He's de-essing basically a very wide band of the PA system leaking into the microphone, and that no longer is a source of any audio for the person listening to it who's in front of the PA.
And I'm glad you said that, because another benefit of the dynamic EQ is that I can, depending on who's singing, so Luke's got a baritone, very powerful voice. And so I can set my dynamic EQ to open up with his vocal register and not to pay attention as much to a high frequency noise or somebody in the crowd shrieking won't open that mic because I've got it set for Luke's voice, which is that rich baritone. And so you can select what frequency you want to basically open the microphone. Kind of like a frequency sensitive gate, but again, this is much smoother. And you can, I usually use, I think, 2 bands of dynamic EQ to accomplish this.
Okay, another related question that just came in was, could you use an expander like a dynamic EQ? Would that
Not
be?
in this case. You're playing with fire. Again, you have to really take into account what are you trying to do. A person who sings in front of a PA, in this instance, we have a guy, right? He's going to be on screen. He's loud, powerful. He sings. He's okay out there. There's input. There's the other thing, right? Luke is very loud. He's not shy. He's plenty involved in the show, and he's out there giving us input. I mean, if you did this with, a 13-year-old girl who's, 85 feet in front of a stadium, it's a problem. That's when the real tricks have to come out. But no, the expander, I've heard about it used mostly, but this is another, once you cross that line downstage of 0 and you're in front of it, that stuff goes away. A lot of the plug-in stuff goes away, the de-essers and the C6s and all that kind of stuff. You have to be very delicate with your use of it because the dynamic swings from top to bottom because you're trying to repair something you've done yourself is problematic. It's just a chain of things going worse. You're just going to make it worse for yourself.
There are plugins. I know Waves has I think it's Waves has a very popular plugin which accomplishes the same thing.
Yeah, but
I don't use plugins, and I use it on the input strip of the channel, and again, that gives me, I can have 40 channels of it if I want.
The leakage,
much more flexible.
The leakage is got to be good, if that makes any sense. There is no pointy part of a 58 at 3, 4, 5K. There's not a giant rise above 10K. So even the leakage does not amplify what is going on in his vocal mic when he's out front. The flatter response actually works out, better for us. But yeah, reliability, what is he comfortable singing on, is really where we pick the microphone. And then once we get it to sound right, the job is to make it sound right everywhere. So my work goes on months before. We know what the set design is going to be. We know how far the thrust is. We start to narrow or widen the angles of the PA boxes in appropriate locations so that we try and keep this part of the deck straight out in front of the stage, very quiet. But there is no way to keep the T, at 65 or 85 feet, I believe, it goes 60 feet in one way and 60 feet in another. So now he's really out there. He's on the stadium floor, full bore, getting all of it. And he loves being out there. So having it whistle and howl and do all that nonsense, I'm not going to be the guy blowing his groove. So you figure it out. You do the best you can with it. We've been good with it so far.
Awesome. Question about the Axient Digital. I think Frank definitely alluded to this earlier. How are you getting your inputs? Are you going digital? Are you doing analog? I think Frank likes AES.
Yeah, Seth and I have been on that. Yeah, we've been on that for a while. It lights up colors in that microphone that you don't hear otherwise. We also are now in the age of 32-bit consoles and mic pre's. We're seeing real changes in what things sound like. We also have experienced what it sounds like when you don't have a clock that you're used to. We use an isochrome Trinity. It sounds fantastic. If we have to do a B rig where there isn't one, we surely notice the difference when it's not there. I don't know, the microphone's much more stable to me frequency-wise in front of a PA system than the analog is. I'm sure somebody's going to tell me I'm out of my mind, but I do find that to be less and less of a problem as well.
For me, the digital signal path is really a key component of what I'm doing in the ears. And I've noticed this for years. When you have a straight digital path and you cut out all of the A to D and D to A conversions that you can, you end up with a very phase coherent sound in the ear monitors. And it's really something that you notice more when you have the microphone and you're listening to yourself, because it sounds so crisp and clear, and it's right on top of your eardrums. I find that even if it's a small amount of latency, 2 milliseconds, 3 milliseconds, you're not really hearing the latency, you're not hearing that delay, it's imperceptible, but you are hearing the phase smear, and you are hearing the comb filter effect of these conversions. And so to me, having a straight, pure digital signal path until it hits the ears means that I do much less EQ, I do much less manipulation of that signal, and it stays coherent and pristine all the way through. And for the artist, it's very often not super perceptible, but often the comment is, it sounds so bright, it sounds so clean. And I do not do any high frequency boosting at all. I leave my microphone for Luke, for the most part, there's a high pass filter, and aside from that, it's flat. And it sounds, it doesn't sound like what most people think a 58 would sound like. It sounds like a very expensive condenser mic that always works.
Awesome. All right. So just to double check in, given that it's coming near 11, we still have quite a few more questions. Are you comfortable going over?
I could stay here all day.
All right. Awesome.
This is the greatest thing ever.
Awesome. So I am going to bring up, you were nice enough to share with me some of your input. So let's pivot a little bit and talk about some wired mics for a second. All right. So, we see the 58, and we talked about that with Luke for a minute. The one thing that I do want to bring up, because it was fun to see it on your input list, is the VP88, which I think is a microphone that most people are not familiar with. It's been around for a really long time. You want to talk about how you're using that one and why?
Yeah, it was several years ago. I watched Andy Johns build a drum mix in the studio with Shannon Larkin from Godsmack. Totally different thing, but he turned on the channels right at first day, and within 30 seconds it was massive sounding. So I begged him, like, what did you do? Well, how did you do that so quickly? He said, I don't know what you're talking about, gruff and angry. So he finally said, just come here. And it was to a stereo pair in the room. And that was it. He just had them cranked wide open, left it right all the way, and it sounded like I was sitting at the drum set. Fast forward 5-8 years later, I see Bill Chappelle's got him on top of his overheads on Korn. I start to see him on TV shows, and I think, well, they're way too expensive and that. And then, was it Linda Ronstadt? They used one in the piano in an MS configuration. The piano sounded unbelievable. I forgot about it. And then Seth brought it up. We should try something stereo on the overhead, about a VP88. And man, when we turned it on for the first time by themselves, it was like that all over again, like you were sitting in the chair. It's an awesome sounding mic. The image is beautiful. And in a big PA system, when you have a little, 2 more inputs to do this beautiful spread of drums or whatever, really, you could use them for anything. We couldn't pass it up, so we added 2 more channels, stuck it in there, and called it good. It was more hassle getting the hardware to get it up high enough over the kit. Yeah, it's a big piece.
It's a pretty long piece with the stereo split. So
aside from the vocal, that's probably my favorite mic on the stage.
Yeah.
The for what I do, having that overhead capability, we also have closed cymbal mics. It gives, if I want to change a feel between a ballad or an acoustic kind of sounding song and a more rocky song, I can just make adjustments to overhead cymbal levels and totally change the character of the drum kit without any effects or any nonsense by going for a more overhead dominant sound or a more close mic dominant sound. It gives you a tremendous amount of flexibility. And for me, the mic doesn't really have a sound. It's kind of a transparent thing. It sounds like what I hear. If I sit behind the drum kit, I'm a drummer. If I sit behind the kit and play with no ears on, put my ears in and play, listening to that VP, it sounds the same. You get it directly over the drummer's head, and it sounds like what your ears hear. It's perfect.
Nice. The other mic I wanted to ask about is your choices for the guitar. I believe they're guitar cabinet mics, the 27 and the 313.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So the 313, actually, both of them were suggestions of Ryan. He came into rehearsals when we were in Nashville, and we were dealing with other stuff. He said, I have some other stuff you want to try. So he brought a pair of 313s in. Actually, we had 6 of them. We had them everywhere for a while. Let's see what happens. They wound up being awesome on Kevin Aerosmith's guitar rig. And the 313 has a dual voicing option, right? You can spin it around, and it's a completely different sounding element, which gave us another thing if we wanted to. They sound really good. He has a pair of Morgans, I believe, amplifiers. You know, again, boutique custom built. He plays these beautiful guitars that carry these lush voicings. They're bright, they're dark, and you hear all the different guitars. You don't hear just a mic and a cabinet. So it does a really, really special job of capturing, you know, a very small cabinet with that ribbon mic. It just sounds great, you know.
And I just want to clarify, Kevin plays Dr. Z amplifiers.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I don't remember, but they're great sounding, whatever they are.
Cool. Question came in. How are you mounting the Pintec RS5 triggers to the drum shells? Only using them to trigger the threshold of the tom gate? There's some curiosity on that one.
Yeah, that's it. It's an old trick. It's older than I am. We try, if the drummer really cares about appearances or that, we mount them close to on the performer's side of the kit, about an inch off the top head with Velcro. Take everything off, all the whatever it has on it already, and just Velcro hook on one side, loop on the other. It's a 1/4 inch unbalanced cable into a mic channel, and that goes down the snake into the console as its own channel, as if it's a microphone. And we just have, you know, kick trigger, kick, tom trigger, tom 2 trigger, 3. So you can see them bouncing next to each other input-wise. And that's how you key it. So it keeps the dynamics of the drummer closer to, he can keep all the low stuff because the thresholds are not audio based, they're electronic based, of the pulse coming out of the trigger into the key input. It cleans up the kit. The other thing, I mean, we go very deep with the mic placements. We use crash guards around the back of the set for the guitar mics, the hi-hat mics and ride cymbals. Everything is isolated very well. We can hear every single element on its own during line check in such a way that it just open everything everywhere, because like you said, it is a very kind of a large input list. You have to maintain control of it. And if you can do it acoustically, without a plug-in, without a gate, without anything, good mic placement, the right mic at the right source, you're 90% of the way toward where you want to be.
Question, I think this is more on the Seth and Dustin. I see a couple Q mode here. I see you're using Q mode here. How are you using Q mode for your ears?
You want me to answer, Seth?
Yeah,
Either
sure.
of you.
Honestly, I think really myself and the backline guys are the only ones that actually use that feature. Probably more me than anybody, because I just like to have everybody's mix on one pack so that I can, be monitoring. Some of the backline guys are responsible for more than one dude, so they use it for that, just to toggle back and forth between mixes. That's what it's really for.
And
I don't think Seth really uses it.
I don't use it because just the way my personal workflow, I like to do things from the same place. So I listen to the Q output of my desk. And so when I select somebody's mix, that's what I'm listening to. That's how I punch around. I never really want to change anything on the belt pack, because then I've got two places where something's happening, and it's just too easy to forget what you're doing, So I always cue off the desk, and I always listen to the output of my desk, the cue output. The cue function is awesome for guests. You might have a singer from another band come up and like, hey, let me listen. And Dusty, you can give him a pack that's set up so he can, if he wants to listen to the bass player's mix, he can just do that. If he wants the lead singer, hey, it's there too. And so in that sense, it's really convenient, but it's not something that I personally use while I'm mixing.
Right.
I love the feature. It's awesome.
Awesome. So we're going back to the wired mics again. One question came up about the 181s. I think looks like they're on hi-hat.
Yep, and the ride mic.
And the ride.
If that hasn't been there.
Yes.
No, we have something else for the shaker. Yeah, they're amazing. They're great sounding mics. They're very easy to place. They're low profile. It's hard. Well, you know, that's the other thing too. We have to deal with video screens. There's cameras everywhere. They're all over the kit. We have to kind of fit in and not the concession they made for the VP88. We can't get away with like a U89 on a hi-hat, right? No, they're great sounding mics. They're really true. I have not used them on anything, but I have seen them on toms. I've seen them used in a lot of places. You know, the whole drum set, not just the brass.
Cool. Question came in, and I realized that we didn't actually describe it, about Q mode. What exactly is Q mode? So we probably should have done that. Dustin, actually, why don't you talk through how you're setting up Q mode and exactly what it's doing for you?
Yeah, Q mode is just a feature on the belt pack. You can go into utilities. I believe it's the top selection. You get into Q mode, and once you're in there, you can go ahead and sync that pack up to. I don't know what the limit on mixes is. I don't know that there even is one. I do up to 10 mixes on my pack that I use. It has everybody in the band's mix plus the Q, and I think that's all it's the best part about it for me as a tech is that, you know, if one of the guitar players is having an issue, with his ears, I can immediately go to that pack and listen to that mix. If there's a troubleshooting issue with Seth, you know, he can cue something up and I can be on the Q mix in no time and listening to what he's hearing. That's really the gist of it. Does that help?
Yeah, so if you've never, those of you who are watching, if you haven't used QPack, and I apologize, I don't have a pack with me, you just end up in Q mode. Once you have all of those mixes, you can just use the arrow keys to change to the different mixes on that single pack. So that way you don't have to replug into different packs and have more hardware to carry around. You just have one pack with all your mixes.
That's correct. That's a good explanation.
It's an awesome utility from my point of view for our audio techs. It streamlines things on our workflow to a great degree, having that flexibility. I think also
I spend most of my
I think for the guys that you know, for modern engineers that are more comfortable pushing buttons on the belt pack, I think it gives you a more true representation of what the guys on stage are hearing, because you're not hearing the summing of the Q bus on the console. From my point of view, that's fairly minor, and I don't feel like it impedes me that much, but I can see that for some people that might be an advantage.
Cool. All right, so a question that came in, and we're going to pivot back to, I think, talking about front of house, is asking Frank how he deals with feedback, especially when your artist is in front of the...
I don't.
Like, what are your tips?
Honestly, the first thing is to use the right mic. Right? We've heard this discussion, like you've got the wrong mic on the right guy. It doesn't work. So that's the first thing. They've got to be comfortable. The feedback thing is really, you know, everybody who's reasonable can't be thinking about it being the loudest thing ever. It just has to be under control at a level that's appropriate for the show you're mixing. I would have a much harder time doing this if it was a metal band out in front of the PA, because the volume levels are considerably louder than what you would do at a show like this. So the very first thing is, what are you trying to do? That's it, right? After that, if you really have another artist, not Luke, we're here talking about Luke. I don't have this issue with him. The minute I go somewhere else and they want to do the same thing, well, you're back at the same starting line, but your racer might not race as fast. You've got some other stuff you've got to do. The expanders, I don't know. I don't think that's a great idea. I think good audio practice, aiming the PA where it needs to be aimed to start with, is a fine idea. After that, if you absolutely have to, you start inserting narrowband notches until you run out of reasons to keep inserting them. How loud is it now? But by that point, you can get loud, but it doesn't sound very good, if that makes any sense. Where you have to strike a balance there between the thing sounding like it's supposed to and the thing being louder than it's supposed to.
Seth, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, just wanted to point out that, again, with Luke, we have the advantage that he has excellent mic technique. He never cups the microphone. He knows what he's doing with the mic. He stays on it. He's awesome. There are other artists that are more in the habit of perhaps cupping the mic, and I think we've all worked with them. And when you have somebody doing that in front of the PA in a stadium, it changes the equation significantly in terms of feedback control and that kind of thing. And that's really when we start having to pull all the tricks out of the bags, is when you have somebody doing something unreasonable. We're fortunate in that our singer is an eminently reasonable man, and he knows how to use his mic without any strange theatrics.
Yeah, after a reasonable thing, you can keep going. I mean, there are tricks to moving him off the center of the PA pan-wise by shifting the image left and right electronically. You can start inserting, like I use it now as a matter of, it's my whoopee. If I have one whoopee on planet Earth, it's the Neve Portico 5045. I still use an analog piece of gear because I still need to be able to control it by hand. My setup in front of house is not typical. If I was just doing the band, like, but I'm not. I'm doing Luke Bryan, so the dude has to be the dude all night. So there's literally a summing bus where I have band on one side, Luke on the other. And if he's not giving me all of it for one reason or another, I can quickly move the balance between one and the other without trying to do all the weird stuff on the other side. There's ways to deal with it, but not all of them. In the end of the day, you're still mixing a show with music. That's just my way of looking at it.
So a comment/question came in that I thought was pretty great, was how did you get so lucky to find a reasonable artist?
He didn't have any bad.
That is just kind of awesome.
So I'll say this: he never had any bad habits. He didn't have any real bad habits. He didn't listen to his ears at insane volume levels. He sings. He plays. I don't know. It's got. Yeah, you're right. We're unbelievably fortunate human beings to be able to work around this. It's not, not everybody's like this. We've all heard and seen.
I'd like to say that I ask myself that same question all the time.
Perfect. So one question that we have for Frank, actually, this is more of a story. We asked you to bring a particular prop with you today because we were talking about just fun experiences. This doesn't actually have to do with Luke, but was just sort of amazing. So
we were fortunate enough to come to the shop in Chicago last year, and see what goes on, like how the operation works and like the detail involved in making the things we use. It was very, I don't know, familiar. Let's put it that way. There's a lot of similarities between yourselves and Claire Brothers. It was nice to see. And I watched the drop test, and Ryan was nice enough to like take us through, and everybody took us through the shop. We watched you guys destroying things for no good reason. It was great, right? So I had an already destroyed, well, they gave me this, right? So this was the Unidyne talkback mic with the initials, because my whole name doesn't fit on it. And then there was the 50th anniversary, right? Which I think one of the panelists is using. And this is really the only, well, actually, one of two microphones I've kept over my career from singers. This was back when I used to mix monitors and we used 58s. And this was what one of the guys. Yeah, yeah. Do you think? Yeah.
Who else?
He used to bash them into his skull and then fire him into the floor. We had a switcher box under the drum riser with the mic cables taped to it. Yeah, it's a wired mic. It's not wireless or anything fancy. But he used to bash himself in the skull with it. This doesn't have any skin or hair on it, but this worked all the way up until, it didn't sounded like it looked, but it worked, right? So I thought that was funny. But I don't keep a whole lot of audio gear around the house.
In the early thousands, the rock bands were in the habit of doing the head smash. There was a handful of metal bands that was what you did between 2000 and 2004. You just smash yourself in the forehead with the 58.
Do you add any padding to that, or just go for it?
There was one band that I didn't work directly for. They were on the tour, but they wore, at that time, the lead singer wore a bunny rabbit costume covered in blood, and he had a fake bullet hole in the middle of his forehead. And that bullet hole was kind of a silicone thing that gave him a little bit of padding when he would do that. But the rest of the guys I was aware of, it was just full on, right to the forehead. All
right, that sounds fun.
Somebody's asking about the delay trick. Yeah. Okay. So I'll give up the ghost here, or give up the secret, whatever it's called. So a long time ago, Greg Price and Mike Adams on Ozzy had the vocal wedges on Ozzy. If anybody here understands or knows what it's like, it's catastrophically loud, right? This is Ozfest in '99. All wedges, no in-ears. It's a massive amount of 2-inch speakers all facing this guy. So what they did was break the mix up into separate mixes: inside, middle, outside pair, and then pair behind them. And they would take a harmonizer and slide them so that the vocal, which never, the dry was never on stage. They would just sweep this chorus. So he swept from left to right, and it would move outward and inward. So his center of gain never stayed in one place. So I said, I'll try this with a chorus in front of the PA system. And for this now, I use for like the guests. It becomes more of a thing for the guests than it does for Luke, is to take that chorus and slide the time back and forth between the left and right PA. The time changes depending how far apart the PA is, and you just set a gentle sweep back and forth that's never in the center, but it's not obvious, but it gets you a little bit more gain. You keep the pitch shift to a minimum, and you just put the affected side back into it. If you do it to somebody who's singing all night, you'll start to notice the flutter. So it doesn't really work for a single guy or a single girl, single artist. But when you have multiples and backgrounds and everybody, that's the way. It works very well for that. It gets you a couple of more dB, maybe. But again, it's another one of the expander, the 5045. It's just another trick. Keep the source out of the center of the PA for as long as you can. And when it is there, get it out of there as fast as you can. That's the trick. That's all.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think we've actually gotten through all of the questions that have come in so far. So I'm going to, we're going to close with one final question for all of you. And that is your favorite Shure microphone and why.
I'll go. SM58 all day long. It is, I can do any singer in the world with that microphone. I know what it's going to do. It costs $100. I can throw it against a wall, it'll still work. And I can get one in the middle of the day in Indonesia if I need to. That is probably my single favorite microphone.
Dustin? Do you have a favorite?
The 58's awesome. I'd have to say a 57 probably, because you can put it on just about anything. But 55 gets the style points.
Right on. Fair. Frank?
Yeah, the SM58. There's no substitute. It's again, you can find it anywhere on planet Earth. Every one of them sounds like the last one. They never don't work.
Perfect. All right, we're going to bring Ryan back in to close this out. Thank you, everyone, very, very much for doing this.
Yes, thank you, Jen, as well, and Jason for doing the co-hosting today. And Frank, Seth, and Dustin, thank you guys very much for your time today. It was an absolute pleasure to take us through your typical days out on the road, and we really enjoyed that. So before we go, we've got some announcements to make. We've got some Pro Tech Talks coming up every first and third Tuesday of the months. So please join us for that. You get a lot of technical information. You can ask questions, and there's definitely a lot of great information to be discovered if you join us. And then we will also have some webinars coming up every Friday of this month as well. So go to that website there on your screen and join us next week and for several weeks. So we'll be happy to welcome you in. Again, gentlemen, thank you very much, and want to wish everyone a wonderful weekend. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, everybody. Ryan. Sure, this was cool.
Thank you, guys.
Rock.
Thanks, guys.